Russia's President Vladimir Putin announced a mobilization of hundreds of thousands of Russian reservists to fight in Ukraine. Zelensky delivered remarks to the UN General Assembly via video, urging punishment for Russia. But why is Putin trying to do this? Keep on watching this video to find out. First, let's talk a little about history. Russia unlawfully annexed Ukraine's eastern and southern regions after President Vladimir Putin signed treaties recognizing the annexation. This followed Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014. Putin's chilling promise to safeguard the newly acquired areas by all possible measures came 7 months into the conflict. Kremlin officials had their backs against the wall and almost threatened nuclear annihilation daily. In response, Ukraine's president immediately applied to join NATO, putting Russia on the defensive against the West. You were wrong if you believed the Cold War and the threat of nuclear Armageddon ended in the 1980s when Mikhail Gorbachev was Soviet leader and Ronald Reagan was US president. Even though the memories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are sealed into the collective consciousness of humanity, the prospect of nuclear war is again being discussed. Putin has made it clear that any attack on the newly seized regions will be interpreted as an attack on Russia, following a string of humiliating military defeats. He wasn't kidding when he stated he'd use whatever was at his disposal, even the nuclear option. According to Nigel Gould-Davies, the former British ambassador to Belarus, "We are in an escalation phase, and Russia now is confronted with a succession of more radical alternatives than previously." According to the International Institute for Strategic Studies Senior Fellow for Russia and Eurasia, Nicholas Gould-Davies, Putin has increased the range and severity of the measures Russia is taking, including annexation and nuclear threats, because Russia's attempt to win the war through more moderate means have failed. Tens of thousands of Russian soldiers who had been called up to participate in the conflict were fleeing Russia even as Moscow seized the 4 Ukrainian regions, a decision the vast majority of the world would not recognize. Abbas Galyamov, a former Kremlin speechwriter turned political analyst, connected Russia's military setbacks and the annexation drive on Friday. Seems like a feasible attempt to answer, he remarked. Ukrainians are doing something, taking steps in the material world, while the Kremlin is developing some kind of virtual reality, incapable of responding in the real world. Putin is motivated by years of what he sees as Western humiliation following the fall of the Soviet Union. And the fact that his prior acts of slaughter and horrors in Chechnya and Syria were met with no international response gave him the impression that he was free to restore Imperial Russia. This is no longer the case. The United States and Europe are providing billions of dollars in military aid to highly motivated Ukrainian forces to help them recapture land from the enemy, all while sending strong signals that catastrophic repercussions will follow any deployment of non-conventional weapons by Moscow. So why is Putin up in the ante in Ukraine? With the partial mobilization announced on September 21st, Russian President Vladimir Putin has upped the ante in his war against Ukraine by sending 300,000 reserve troops to fight in Ukraine. Unannounced changes to Russian legislation were brought to the Duma the day before, and they were quickly approved after 3 readings. The penalty for desertion, surrender, or refusal to combat is severe, as outlined in these documents. All of the districts of Ukraine that Russian soldiers either partially or totally occupy requested referendums on joining Russia by the end of this week, which were filed the same day by the Russian-imposed administrations that controlled those territories. These 3 events send a message to the West that amount to, "You decided to fight us in Ukraine, now try to fight us in Russia itself." Or, to be accurate, what we call Russia. Expectations are high that the West will object to this. Meanwhile, domestically, the struggle is transformed from a special operation on foreign soil into a battle for the defense of ostensibly Russian territory, giving the Kremlin virtually unrestricted power to impose its will on the populace. Putin is using the possibility of an invasion by foreign troops, even though the border is not exactly where it was yesterday, as an excuse to transform the special operation into an actual war. Begin a partial mobilization, and increase the threat of nuclear use. Putin warned that the tides could turn against those who try to use nuclear weapons to blackmail Russia. In a speech he delivered on September 21st, Russian forces may now begin attacking Ukrainian targets they had previously avoided. Putin has decided to take swift action in an effort to terminate the conflict as quickly as possible, limit casualties, and preserve gains, since time is not on Moscow's side, and the diplomatic, material, and human resources needed for the special operation are running out. If Putin fails to stop the war, he may at least shift blame away from himself and make his invasion of a neighboring nation into a defensive war, with the goal that the difference difference will sway the opinions of average Russians and give the Kremlin greater leeway to do whatever actions it sees fit. The difficulty is that Russia's foes don't think it deserves any of the territories it has captured. There has been a split inside the Russian regime between the War Party and the Special Operation Party ever since the conflict began. The latter group held that the war should be fought solely by trained professionals and that civilian life should continue largely unaffected by the fighting. The War Party, on the other hand, think that Russia's economy, culture, and everyday life should all undergo a radical transformation as a result of the invasion of Ukraine. This political group supports total mobilization, wants to abolish Russia's consumer culture, and wants to seize control of the country's financial institutions. There was a period when the Russian leadership thought that keeping up appearances and relying on the market economy and a consumerist culture would be the best way to survive the sanctions. That may now alter. Putin maintains that he was not lying when he said Russia was not at war with Ukraine and was instead conducting a limited special operation there. Russia has refrained from sending conscripts to fight in Ukraine, has not sent all its forces there, and has not carpet-bombed. Putin's modus operandi, as a former Secret Service officer, also explains why the operation was only meant to endure for months, not years. Putin's rise to power at the end of 1999, the destruction of the television network NTV, and the oil and gas company Yukos, the election of Putin's successor in 2008, Putin's return to power in 2011 and 2012, the amendment of the constitution to reset the clock on presidential terms, and even the Second Chechen War and annexation of Crimea were all accomplished within the time frame, up to 6 months, of a special operation. So, up until recently, Putin was a leading proponent of the special military operations strategy. Nonetheless, after several months of combat, Ukraine is making gains and taking back land it has lost. A success for the party of war and mobilization was signaled by the Russian army's disorganized withdrawal from Kharkiv. Referendums in occupied regions may have been postponed or cancelled due to this retreat. Losing a piece of one's own country is much more embarrassing than losing conquered land. The Russians made a critical mistake in Kharkiv by abandoning their territory to fortify other fronts. The Kremlin's sudden announcement of referendum dates seems like a superstitious bid to lift a ban on holding elections. Even if Russia's military is defeated on the world stage, it will always triumph in a struggle on its own soil, because the people will never be defeated. Victory is certain if the Kremlin declares the seized territory to be part of Russia. The legal reclassification of the occupied territories as Russian territory will help the Kremlin deal with a number of problems. Local support is essential for seizing large portions of another country with a small number of soldiers. Moscow has so far identified enough pro-Russian or apathetic Ukrainians to run the occupied regions. With the Russians having retreated from Kharkiv, fewer people will be prepared to work together. These votes reveal Russia's territorial aspirations in the conquered territories. Another problem is that some contract troops may refuse to deploy in Ukraine because their contracts do not necessitate it. In order to get rid of the occupiers, Russia must declare the seized Ukrainian territory to be part of Russia. Russia's top officials have repeatedly assured the public that the special operation goals will be achieved. This was a helpful comment in light of the haziness of the objectives. If Russia can't take over the entire country of Ukraine, it may at least take control of the south and east. Donetsk and Luhansk might also be focal points. If that wasn't possible, then Russia might turn its war spoils into new provinces of Russia. The award was secondary to Russia's wish to demonstrate its seriousness and legitimacy by seizing the opportunity to do so. More recently, this almost achieved feat has all but disappeared. Putin ups the ante in an effort to restore peace, presumably in the hopes that the other parties would back down. If he's wrong again, he has to establish that he wasn't trying to trick anyone. He could resort to risky tactics. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments section down below. If you enjoyed today's video and found it interesting, then make sure to leave us a thumbs up, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel, and click on the bell icon to be up to date with the most exciting content as soon as it's uploaded. Thanks for watching, see you again soon in another video.